So most beginners think that color grading looks insane because the color page is very complicated the first time you open it. But in this video, I'm just going to show you the very basics that you need to get started in coloring and understanding how this whole page works. So you don't need to worry about having an amazing looking node tree or all these different LUTs and effects and stuff. We're just going to go right down to the basics, which you can probably use for about 90% of stuff that you ever create. Okay, so I'm in the color page, and don't worry if yours doesn't look like this. It'll just be because I have different tabs that are open right now. So first here we have the LUTs page, which we do not need, so we can click this off. And then we have the viewer, so this is where our clip is going to be. We have our nodes here, and this is my color corrected clip. I'm just going to delete these so we can start from scratch together. Here we have the effects panel, which we do not need today, so we're just going to get rid of that one as well. We can see both clips here. Now I have two clips in my timeline. So on the left is a clip that is color graded for a short that one of my friends is doing. And on the right is the raw clip, just with the basic log to Rec 709 grade. So if you click up here, is where you can turn the clips on and off. And then we have our timeline, and we can turn that off because we don't need that today. Just in as example, I have a finished timeline here, and you can see the difference. I can see all these different clips because I have hundreds of clips in the timeline. And then I can also see a much messier timeline as well. But obviously we're just keeping it simple today, so we're just going to work with one or two clips in the timeline. So down here is where we have the basics of color correction, and this is our primary color wheels at the moment. If we click on this, it will go to our primary color bars, which is the same as the color wheels, but it's displayed a different way. And then the last one is the log wheels, which look the same as the color wheels, but they work in a very different way, and I'll go into that later. Now, in the middle, you have all these extra fancier stuff that we're not going to use today. It's usually set on curves at the beginning, which is something I do use quite a lot. And then on the right is where we have our scopes, and the default one is the parade, which is the main one that we're going to be using today. And you can see it's separated into red, green, and blue channels. Just a couple of things I do to set this up. So my scopes go from 0 to 100 because I prefer to work in percentage. You might see 1023. So if you come to these three dots, come to the waveform scale style, you can work in percentage, or you can work in 10-bit, which is the up to 1023, or the 12-bit, but percentage is just the easiest one for me. You also want to make sure that your display qualifier focus is on, because what that does is, as long as we have the qualifier selected here, wherever we hover over our image, you're going to see a circle pop up, and it will show you what part of the image you're on and where that is on the scopes. So here, obviously, that's very red, and it's a darker red, so we can see it in the darker parts of the red scope, and there's not much green and blues in there, so they're a lot further down. If we go to an obviously green part, you can see that that is higher on the green scopes compared to the rest of them. So we're going to start color correcting our footage, and the main difference between color correcting and color grading is that color correcting is getting your footage to a kind of neutral starting point, because all cameras shoot differently. You might have the white balance change because the sun goes overhead or comes out of a cloud for a few seconds, and you just want things to look as nice as possible in the way you want them before you start adding your grades, because usually we color correct everything in a timeline, and then we can add a grade that works with most of our footage rather than having to do everything one at a time because everything has different color corrections. But at the very gist of it, color correcting, making your footage look good, neutral, as if it's real life, and then color grading is adding something cool and sexy, like, you know, the orange and teal look that everyone loves, or making South America orange in every single show on Earth. So I have my clip highlighted. I'm going to scrub to a point where I want to start the color grade just so I can get the best look. About there is good. And if you just take a look at the scopes, you'll be able to see that when you're moving through the clip, you can see it moving on the scope. So obviously this is a mainly static shot. And when everything is off and he starts coming on screen, you can see in the scopes how his face is appearing in the different areas. And that just means that we know exactly what area we are actually color correcting at that point. So first, I have no nodes on my clip, so I'm just going to Alt-S just to start a new node. And we're just going to take a look at what each one of these does in the color wheels. So lift primarily works with the shadows. And we can see here, if we bump this up, it is pushing the shadows up. And if we bump it down, it's pushing the shadows down. So how this works is it keeps everything at the top moving a lot less than everything at the bottom. So obviously the shadows are moving more than everything else, but it is dragging everything with it. So it creates a nice even curve through your footage, and it doesn't look jarring between the shadows and the midtones. You can think of it as if you're putting a pin at the top and everything is dragging up towards that pin. The gamma is the midtones. So if we drag that down, we can see the mids being moved down, while the shadows and the highlights are moving a lot less. And then up, showing it the other way. And then we go to the gains, which is mainly the highlights. Again, it's dragging everything else with it, but it's trying to stick with the highlights a lot more. So they're the things that are going to be pushed way more than everything else. And the gain is where it mainly affects the highlights, and it won't affect the shadows as much. So we're pushing the gain up. You can see the shadows are staying relatively at the same point, but it is stretching a little bit. And we'll drag them down. Again, you can see the highlights are being pushed way more than everything else, but it is dragging everything else along down with it. And that's intended because, like I said, you don't want things to look too jarring. If you were just dragging down the gain on its own, it would create a really flat image. And that is what the log wheels do. So we will come to that later because it is good for certain situations. But for color correcting, you mainly want to stick around the color wheels for the base grade. And then you go to the log wheels for the finer tuning later. And the offset is basically an overall exposure adjustment. That was hard to say. And if you drag that down, you can see everything is moving equally together. And if you drag it up, it's going the opposite way. Okay, and then we have the color bars, which basically does everything the same way. So if you drag the wheels underneath them, they will do the same thing that the primary color wheels does as well. The only difference on these is that instead of controlling the colors with a wheel, you control them with these. So again, it works exactly the same way. It's just which one you prefer. This one is easier for a little bit of fine tuning sometimes, but you also have these blue, green, and red sliders on both of them. So it does come down to preference on this point. Now the log wheels is where the main difference comes into play. So I'm just going to add some contrast to this shot just so we can see what's happening a little bit easier. Just a quick S-curve. Okay, so the log wheels on the shadow, if we drag that wheel now, you can see it's not pushing everything up equally with it. So it's not creating any sort of curve. It's just playing with the shadows and not affecting anything else. Let's reset that one. It's the same with the midtones as well. It's going to drag the midtones down or drag the midtones up and not change anything else around there. And just the highlights to show that one, dragging them up and dragging them down. The offset is still going to work the same way as the other wheels do as well. So this is why you would mainly use the primaries as well, unless you were certain that you only wanted to affect the highlights a little bit, which you do in certain situations. I know especially with Lumix cameras, I often have an issue where the red is way too strong. So I do sometimes drag the red down on the highlights just to avoid it clipping. And that means it's not going to affect the red in all the other parts of my images. So it is useful. It is good for tweaks, but we're not going to use it that much today. Okay, now let's get started on the color correcting. So I'm going to start with the shadows. I can see that I have a lot of room in the scopes to come down with the shadows because they can be a lot closer to zero. You don't normally want them clipping. There are certain occasions where pitch black is fine, but for this one, I don't want anything to clip, but I do want to drag it down. So I'm just going to drag the shadow, just going to drag the lift down just so it sits just above the zero. Around there is good. And then obviously I have a lot of room in the highlights to play with. So I'm going to drag those up. Now I don't want everything to get too bright and I definitely don't want it to clip like that. So just use your eyes and the scopes. Don't let everything clip, but drag it down to where it looks natural. So I'm going to say around there for now. And then I'm going to come to the gamma, which is all the midtones. Because looking at this, to me, his face doesn't really have enough depth. So I'm going to bring down the mids as well. A lot of the time it's the mid-range that's going to make things pop. So it's not just the gain, it's not just the lift. It's playing with the midtones, and that's really going to make it look like you had an extra light shining on your subject. And it's just really what's going to make things stand out a lot more. So I'm going to bring that down. I want it to be a little bit moodier around there, just so they're sat in the middle of the channel. I'm just going to press Ctrl D to hide the node and have a quick before and after. Oh yeah, that's nice. And you can see with the scopes before it's a lot more squashed. Things aren't really where they're supposed to be. And then bringing it out, it's just adding a lot more contrast to it. An extra one you can do just to check the skin tones is come over to the waveform instead of the parade. Now, if yours doesn't look like this, just come over to these dots here, bring it onto the Y, turn off colorize, and it's easier to read this way. So highlights on skin usually sit around 70%. And if we go to his highlights on his cheek, that is bouncing around the 70% line. So this is looking pretty accurate. Let's just check his neck as well. It's a little bit darker, but okay. So we're going to come back down to the parade now. And then I'm going to create a new node just so we don't have everything on the same node. If you want, a good way to keep this organized is just to right click, node label, and then just call this exposure node because that is our main exposure node. I'm going to press Alt S and I'm just going to give this node label color correction, because here we're going to fix the way this clip looks. So I'm using my eyes on the clip and I'm also using the scopes. And as we said, we can just tell there's a little bit too much red on here, especially on the skin tones and even in the background where it's supposed to be more of a forest. So we're going to come over to here to our midtones, grab on the red and just drag that down to get rid of that a little bit. I actually think just a subtle 0.01 is good enough for this one. But then to my eyes, it looks like it's pushed it a little bit too much towards blue. So we're just going to add a negative on the blue as well. And yeah, that's much better. So just a before, after. So just an extra step, if you do want to have a quick check on your skin tones, you can come over to the vector scope here. And on this, just click these three lines and go show skin tone graticule. And we're just going to make it a little bit brighter. And then if we hover the qualifier over that, we can see that the skin color is quite nicely on that skin tone line. It doesn't have to be exact, it just needs to be around that skin tone line because everyone has different shades of purple and pink and green. And if you film in England like I do all the time, you have different shades of alcoholics. Okay, so now we're going to make a new node. We're just going to call this one extras for now because it's just some extra bits to the color correction. So we have some extra settings on top and below the primary color wheels. We have temperature, tint, contrast, pivot, mids, details, which is like sharpening, color boost, shadows, highlights, saturation, hue, and luminosity mix, or luminous mix, whichever one works. And these basically do what they say. So temperature, if you push it towards the blue, you can see the blue scope going way higher. And this might be nice if that's the kind of effect that you're going for. Or if you wanted to make it look like South America or Narcos, then pump up the orange as well. And you can see it boosting all the reds. Then you have the tint, so pushing the green, making the greens more prominent, bringing down the reds and the blues, or the complete opposite way to make purple more prominent. Contrast is what I want to be using today because I want to add a little bit more of a contrast boost to my footage. And just so you can see what happens in the scopes, it stretches everything from the midtones outwards. And if you do it the opposite way, it drags everything in like a black hole. Just reset that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a contrast boost because I want a little bit more pop in my footage. Around there is good. Let's just check before and after. Yeah, so it's not much, it's just a nice little boost, but I can see that it's pushing the bottom of these scopes a little bit too much. So this is one thing we could use the log wheel for, just to make sure that it doesn't get pushed too much down there, because we don't want to affect the contrast everywhere else. So we're just going to boost that up a little bit on the blacks. See, much nicer. Just head back to the primary wheel. Now we want to maybe add a little bit of color. So we've got the color boost or the saturation. Saturation will boost all the colors equally. Like that. Color boost takes the colors that don't have as much color in them and then tries to boost them first while also boosting everything else. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of color boost here just because I want his skin to pop a little bit more. I think that's good. Okay, so let's do a before and after. So I think that has made a massive improvement, and that is just from using the simplest of things, the primary color wheels and the parades. And now if we wanted to, we would stay tweaking this a hell of a lot more. I tweaked it a lot when I was doing this for someone else because it ended up, he wanted like a very dark black gray kind of thing with just a tiny hint of color. So if this was for something like a promo video for a hiking club, I would probably use this because it looks nice and vibrant. But because it's not that, I'd probably bring down the saturation a little bit to make it look a bit more believable. And I would also probably change the colors of my greens just a little bit as well. So for that one, just an extra tip, come into the curves, come into the hue versus hue, and then make a point on each side of the green. And then there's two ways I could go about this. I could either drag it down and make a more teal grass, which people seem to love on social media, or I could push it up, which I prefer to make a more natural one and drag the greens more towards a nice orangey style, make it look more like a, an English forest. And before and after, and I just think that looks a little bit more natural. It doesn't look like the colors are trying to be too teal. If you want to follow along with this tutorial, I've put the clip in the description down below so you can download it from Google Drive and try it out for yourself.